Hello, my name's Craig Seibert, and this short web seminar is titled The Founders' Thoughts on the Need for God and Christianity in Civics and Society. In this webinar, we're going to take a look at 9 founding fathers and what they had to say on this topic. Some of you as pastors and Christian leaders have heard these quotes before, others have not. Almost everyone has at some point in time heard the newspaper or major mainstream media say that the founders were deists and they weren't really Christians. As we take a look at these quotes, I'll let you make your own assessment. We'll be hearing from John Quincy Adams, Patrick Henry, Sam Adams, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and Noah Webster. Additionally, as I display quotes from each of these founding fathers, I'll provide a summary box at the bottom that just re-summarizes the quote. That will give you both time to look at the quote, consider how I've summarized it, and see if you agree or disagree that the message that's being summarized is what's being said in the text. Because this is a web streamed seminar, you're welcome to pause this web stream or this seminar at any time if you'd like to consider any of these quotes further. John Quincy Adams said this: "The highest glory of the American Revolution was this. It connected in one indissoluble bond the principles of civil government with the principles of Christianity." He was the 5th President of the United States looking backwards, and he uses this word indissoluble, which I thought was a great place to start, and we'll go back to his predecessors, but I wanted to start with his quote. In essence, he's saying the principles of Christianity and the principles of civil government in the United States are incapable of being separated. They are inexplicably bound. And if you'd like to, you can look up the word indissoluble on your own and see that it means exactly that these two things are cemented so well together they cannot be torn apart. Sam Adams, now that we go back prior to the Declaration of Independence and look at some of the early founders, said this: The rights of the colonists may be best understood by reading and carefully studying the great lawgiver and head of the church. He also proposed a motto for the Revolutionary War, and the motto was this: "No king but King Jesus." Well, what Sam Adams is saying in his quotes is that the rights of the colonist are found in the Bible, and so it makes sense that you would study the Bible in order to figure out what the colonist rights are, the rights that are given by God to all people. Patrick Henry said this: "It cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists but by Christians. Not on religions, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. For this very reason, peoples of other faiths have been afforded asylum, prosperity, and the freedom of worship here." He was both member of the Continental Congress and governor of Virginia several times. What he's saying in this quote is that the founders were not deists. They were Christians, and the principles were not some general religious principles, but they came from Christianity. He goes on to say in this last paragraph that ultimately Christianity is what provides freedom of religion for other faith worshippers, because God is ultimately the giver of choice, where he gave Adam and Eve choice in the garden to either follow him or follow their own desires. And so he's saying that the founders were in fact Christians, not deists. John Adams said this: "Before God, I believe the hour has come. My judgment approves of this measure. My whole heart is in it." And he's speaking at the Declaration of Independence debate. "I'm apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival," and that is the date that the Declaration is signed would be some future festival. "It ought to be commemorated as a day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty." And as I said, he said this in the debate for independence. To summarize, what he was saying here is July 4th should be both a celebration, a huge festival, but it should also be a prayer and worship service almost, because God's deliverance and guidance of the colonies had been so conspicuous. His sovereign hand, in fact, was noted several times, was leading this effort. George Washington said this: "And I should be pained to believe that they have forgotten that agency." And when he uses the word "they" there, he's speaking of future generations, which has so often manifested itself during our revolution, or that they failed to consider the omnipotence of that God who's alone able to protect them. First President, of course. And what he's saying here is God's providential protection and guidance were very evident during the Revolutionary War, and to lose sight of this would be tragic and would do great harm. James Madison, primary author of the U.S. Constitution, said this: "We stake the whole future of American civilization not on the power of government, but on the capacity of each and every one of us to govern ourselves according to the 10 Commandments of God." What he's saying here in summary form is that only citizens that can govern themselves by the 10 Commandments will ultimately be free. Otherwise, freedom will totally be lost, as the government will either take all freedom or the nation will exist in anarchy. This is what the founders called self-government. That is, our ability to govern ourselves as individuals by a certain set of parameters, the 10 Commandments. And if we do that, then civil government can be relatively small in size with few laws because the citizens are self-governing. George Washington goes on and says this: "It's impossible to rightly govern the world without God and the Bible. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens." In summary, good government only comes from leaders that are humble before God, and that good government principles come from the Bible. Furthermore, those that seek to undermine this truth are really not patriotic, but despotic. Benjamin Franklin, often called a deist, is very personal in his opinion on God, and this is a speech he gave at the Constitutional Convention, and I'd like you to listen to it closely, for all those have been kind of mentally forced to believe that Franklin was a way-out deist. "In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of superintending providence in our favor." Now this quote goes on, but let me summarize what he's saying right here. God answers prayer. This implies that he's involved in human affairs. This is not a deistic God who created the universe and is now off on a long walk. He's personal, and he's involved in our activities and actions. And Franklin is saying that he believes this firmly. His quote goes on: "To that kind providence," a common phrase that they would have used 200 years ago to speak about God's personal involvement in human affairs, "we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity," that is, happiness. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend, or do we imagine we no longer need his assistance? Again, Franklin's saying here, do we think we can move forward now without God? He's been a part of this all along. Do we think we can move forward now without him? Continuing, "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid?" Again, Franklin is saying God is personal. He's involved in our affairs. We need him. Finishing up, "We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. We shall be divided by our partial local interest, our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves will become a reproach and a byword down to future ages." In summary, Franklin finishes off with this: God's involved in our affairs. Franklin firmly believed this. If we ignore God and turn our back on him, we fail as a nation and will be cursed in the world now and down through the ages. And so I'm not saying that Franklin might have an overall theology that aligns just squarely with yours, but this quote and so many others frankly move him out of what would be called the deist camp, because he believed on a God that was involved intimately in the affairs of men and nations. Alexander Hamilton said this: "For my own part, I surely esteem it a system which without the finger of God never could have been suggested and agreed upon by such a diversity of interest." And he's speaking there about the formation of the Constitution and the Republican nature, small r, of our governing system. And what that word means is the structure or levels of government, implying that there's the federal Constitution, but there's also the whole governing structure of state constitutions and local governments. And that's what the small r republicanism means. God was involved in providing wisdom for the Constitutional Convention, is in essence what Hamilton was saying. And he's even implying the document itself, that God guided the process along as they came up with those constitutional ideas, or the biblical ideas were formed into these constitutional principles. God guided the process. John Adams said this: "There's no government armed with power which is capable of contending with human passions if those passions are not bridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate for the government of any other." Summarizing, if we cannot govern ourselves, the Constitution will not be capable of governing us either. It just won't work if we are not a moral people. The alternative will be tyranny, loss of freedom to follow God, and loss of freedom to share God with others. Noah Webster said this, the father of American education and the writer of the first American dictionary in 1828. "The brief exposition of the Constitution of the United States will unfold to young persons the principles of republican government." There's that word small r again that I defined earlier. "And it is the sincere desire of the writer that our citizens should early understand that the genuine source of correct republican principles is the Bible, particularly the New Testament or the Christian religion." What he was saying is this: the principles of the Constitution and the whole governing structure, that is federal, state, and local, and self-government included, of the United States can be found in the Bible, and particularly the New Testament. So to understand the United States system, students should study both the Bible and the Constitution together. And for 150 years, that's exactly what students in American schools did. As I begin to close, Alexander Hamilton said this, and this is where he lays some responsibility at the church and at Christians' feet. "Let an association be formed and be denominated, that is, means to be organized, the Christian Constitutional Society. Its objective to be first the support of the Christian religion, and then secondly the support of the United States. In summary, Christians in the church should take the lead in studying, understanding, educating, and protecting the Constitution. They do this in order to support the gospel and to foster a biblical worldview of all of life, but also to maintain the freedom and liberty of the United States, that others from other nations or within our nation might be free." Thomas Jefferson, as we begin to wrap down, gave us this warning: "The God who gave us life gave us liberty. And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with his wrath? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever." Again, to summarize, God made us. He gives us life. God gives us liberty. Liberties are not secure without strong belief in God, and that these liberties in fact come from him. When we no longer think this, we will lose our liberties and even face God's judgment. Finally, as I wrap up, John Adams said this: "Cherish these liberties. You will never know how much they cost us." And the cost was high indeed. The founders wrote in the end of the Declaration of Independence that they were giving their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to this task, and in fact they did. But let's explore all the synonyms with the word cherish and see if these describe any of the feelings or sentiments you have as you think about the freedom and liberties that you have in the United States. Synonyms of cherish are these: to admire, appreciate, care, cleave, cling, cultivate, defend, embrace, enshrine, foster, have a fondness for, hold dear, hold precious, hold in high esteem, to honor, to love, to nourish, protect, preserve, to prize, to revere, to safeguard, to shield, to support, to sustain, to treasure, to venerate, and worship. Do any of those words describe how you view the freedom and liberties that you have been passed on down to you in these United States? You're obviously interested enough in this topical series to be listening to this, and so I'm assuming at this point that your level of cherishing the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are on the rise, and that you're using this as a way to motivate yourself and others to really get back around to cherishing and holding in high esteem these precious liberties we've been given. And so we've heard from these men. You can form your own opinion and go back through this webinar again, or maybe you've paused as you've gone through it. But strong men of strong character that really have given us a biblical foundation and a Christian perspective on these United States. Hope this has made a difference for you. And as I've mentioned before, like Robin Williams in the movie Carpe Diem, these men, as they look at us, out at us, over the course of history and time, are saying, Carpe Diem, seize the day. Are we in fact cherishing these liberties that have been given to us? My name's Craig Seibert. Thanks for listening.